I want to say I stopped her. That's the version I'd prefer people believe, that I stood in the kitchen doorway of Halworth Reach and told my wife's mother we were not, under any circumstance, bringing a half-frozen animal into a house that already had an ordinance number stapled to its door. That's not what happened. What happened is I watched Ottilie Rain carry 11 kilos of shivering mud-caked fur through my kitchen like she was carrying a basket of wash, set it in front of the stove, and dare me with her eyes to say a single word. I didn't say the word. I have never once, in 9 years of knowing that woman, won an argument I started before she'd finished setting the table. This was during the Cull years, when every outer settlement from here to the frost line had a standing order. Any unregistered organism found on colony ground gets reported to the warden's office within 6 hours, no exceptions, penalties scaled to the size of the thing and the size of your excuses. Ottilie's excuse, when the notice came due, was that she hadn't found an organism. She'd found something that needed warming, and paperwork could wait until it stopped shaking. She named it moss, for the color it went once it dried out. Not brown so much as a deep, mossy smoke, thick enough to lose a hand in. It had a broad, flat skull, small rounded ears, and eyes the color of poured brass that tracked her around the kitchen like she was the only fixed point in the room. Vesk, the registry would have called it, if she'd ever filed the registry. A predator species, native to the deep frost country past the settlement fence, built low and heavy and patient. None of that mattered to Ottilie. What mattered was that it was cold and it was hers now. Every night before the militia's watch went out, she warmed a pot of milk on the stove. Real milk, traded hard for, not the powdered ration, and set it by the door with the storm lantern lit beside it. She said the light was so Moss could find his way back in from the yard. I think, if I'm honest, the light was so she could sit by the window and watch for him, though she'd have denied that with her whole chest. The militia thought it was funny, the first few weeks. 6 of them ran the perimeter shift out of Halworth Reach, young men mostly, Corin Duss loudest among them, and they'd knock on the door frame on their way past and ask if the beast had passed inspection yet, ha, and Ottilie would tell them to wipe their boots and mind their business, and they'd laugh and go on into the dark. Then the weather turned meaner, and one night Duss came back early off his shift with a wrenched ankle and no lantern of his own, snow coming down sideways. And it was Ottilie's window light he walked toward because it was the only warm thing burning on that stretch of fence. He told it later like a joke, like he'd have found his way regardless. But I saw his face when he said it. He hadn't been sure. The lantern had been sure for him. After that, the mockery changed shape. It didn't go away. It just stopped being about Ottilie. They started lighting their own lantern at the watch house before they went out, and warming a cup of something before they came back in. Not because they believed in anything, they'd have said, but because it had worked once, and men on a cold fence line will keep a habit that's worked once. Somewhere in the second month, Duss started calling it the Vigil, half a joke, the light and warm drink routine, done in a mocking approximation of Ottilie's evening ritual. By the 3rd month, nobody was mocking it. They called it the first Vigil Rite, dead serious, and posted the order of it on the watch house wall like scripture. Lantern lit before dusk, drink warmed before the gate. Both left burning until every man was counted home. Moss grew into that ritual the way a plant grows toward a window. By midwinter he was the size of a hunting hound, then bigger, shoulders like a doorframe, and he'd taken to walking the fence line himself at dusk, pacing it slow beside whichever man had the watch, close enough that they stopped flinching and started talking to him like he understood every word, which, watching his ears track their voices, I began to suspect he mostly did. He never once threatened anyone at Halworth Reach. I want that clear. He put himself between Duss and a rock slide in the 2nd month, took the impact across his own shoulder rather than let it reach the man's leg, and limped for a week without complaint. He slept across Ottilie's threshold most nights, a wall of warm fur between her door and the cold. There was a smaller thing, too, that I only understood later as the same instinct wearing a gentler face. Ottilie had a habit, going back farther than I'd known her, of tapping the rim of a cup twice before she drank from it, her own mother's superstition. Something about not drinking to an empty house. She never taught it to Moss on purpose. But by autumn, whenever she set his bowl down, he'd touch his nose to the rim twice before he drank, patient as a man saying grace, and she'd stand there with her hand pressed flat to her mouth like it was going to get away from her if she didn't hold it in. Duss saw it once through the window, and never told her he had. Some men know which things aren't theirs to laugh at. That was the whole of what Moss was. Patient, watchful, unremarkable in the way a good dog is unremarkable, until you needed him to be something else. Until the day Warden Krosh came out from the district office to do his rounds. Krosh was a small, precise man who believed the ordinance the way other men believe in weather, as a fact that simply governed you, no appeal. He walked into Ottilie's kitchen with 2 enforcement officers behind him, looked at Moss lying across the hearth, and said the words unregistered Class 2 predator organism, the way you'd read a death sentence off a card, because that's exactly what he was reading. He's not registered because he's not a specimen, Ottilie said. He's family. Krosh told her family didn't carry teeth like that, and ordered his men to take hold of the animal for transport and disposal, and it was in front of 6 militiamen, Deuce among them, standing in her doorway with his rifle slack in his hands and his face gone the color of old snow, that Ottilie Rain, 71 years old, was told her judgment counted for nothing against a form. She didn't argue. She walked to the door, and she lit the lantern, hours early, broad daylight, and set it in the window where it had no business burning. Krosh laughed at that, called it a fine gesture, told his men to proceed. I don't fully know how to describe what came out of the tree line an hour later, except to say that the Frost country had never given up its whole population, and Moss had never been the largest thing that lived there. 4 of them came down off the ridge into the yard, heavy-shouldered, silent, moving with the unhurried certainty of animals that have never once needed to hurry for anything. And they didn't attack. They simply arrived, and stood, one at each corner of the house like they'd been posted there, and looked at the enforcement officers with brass-colored eyes that did not blink, and did not waver, and did not, for one single second, look tame. Krosh's men lowered their weapons on their own. Nobody ordered it. Their hands just did it, the way hands do when a body understands something the mind hasn't caught up to yet. That the 2 officers holding tranquilizer rifles were, for the first time in either of their careers, standing at the very bottom of a food chain they had never had to think about before. Krosh found his voice eventually, thin and much higher than it had been in the kitchen, and told his men to fall back to the transport. Nobody argued with him this time either. He left without his forms, without his specimen, and without, I'd guess, much of his standing among the 6 militiamen who'd watched him go pale in front of a 71-year-old woman and her stove-warmed milk. Moss came back inside that night the same as always, shook the snow off at the door, and put his head in Ottilie's lap while she finished the dishes, entirely unbothered, as if nothing in the yard that day had been worth remembering. The Vigil Rite is still posted on the watchhouse wall. Nobody's mocking it anymore, and nobody's pretending it's superstition. Every man who walks that fence line now knows exactly what answers the light if you're patient enough, and kind enough, and foolish enough to leave it burning for something the ordinance says shouldn't exist. I still haven't won an argument with that woman. I've stopped trying.